Welcome to Wells & Young's Brewing Company, Britain's largest privately owned brewery. We now produce amounts of beer undreamt of when we were founded in the 19th century, but at our core remains a family-owned company run by descendants of the founder who share his passion for quality, honesty and good beer.
Charles Wells, who was my great-grandfather, started in business in 1876 after a career in the Merchant Navy. The brewery in Bedford originally had 30 pubs, so really quite small. And Charles developed that over years to something approaching 300 at one stage. Down in London, of course, Young's were doing the same thing with their brewery from Wandsworth. And eventually, in 1976, the Charles Wells Brewery closed and we opened this new one on this site. And then in 2006, their brewery closed in Young's and they moved up here as well. So it's sort of two black and white era breweries coming together in one colour version.
The brewing process starts here in the barley field. Norfolk is one of the finest areas in the world for growing the special varieties of barley that are required for malting and making beer. Mostly that's because of the soil.
The soils are particularly suitable for it, being light and sandy generally, and close to the sea, which has an effect on the barley. Produces a much better quality barley than it does another 30-40 miles inland.
The different types of barley that we use influence the characteristic, the flavour and the colour of the beers that we're making. So traditional English bitter is best made from traditional English barley varieties.
The variety is Maris Otter. It's grown purely for the malting barley industry. It's a very old variety. I think it was first bred in the 60s, maybe late 60s, something like that. It disappeared and has been brought back in because of the quality aspects of the barley. A small section of the brewing industry require a top quality product, and Maris Otter produces the goods.
Once it has been harvested and combined, it then moves on to the maltings, where they carefully go through a process which germinates the seed, allows it just to start growing.
We have a group of farmers that grow specifically the best quality barley for Wells & Young's. After harvest, that grain comes in to the maltings and is stored separately. As and when we put it into the first part of the malting process, which is called steeping, which takes 2 days, and all we do is add water to the barley. Then we need to move it into a germination vessel, and what we do in that vessel is really mimic the weather outside. After 4 days, we need to stop that germinating process, and then we need to kiln it, which is basically drying it down to about 3 to 4% moisture. This adds colour and flavour to the malt.
Once the malt arrives in the brewery, it goes through a careful crushing process rather than heavy milling, and special water is mixed with it to allow extraction and conversion of the starch into fermentable sugars.
Beer is getting on for 95% water, so it is probably our most important raw material ingredient. The Wells & Young's water supply is so good, it's now been classified as a mineral water, and it meets mineral water quality, which is pretty hard going. We could actually sell it as bottled water for the table, but we don't, not because we couldn't, but because we want to use it for making our beers.
Next in the brewing process, we add hops. Traditional varieties, again, grown specially for brewing beer, and we add them early in the brewing process to give aroma and flavour.
A hop is a natural raw material. It was recognised that its properties similar to a grape to wine allows for its aromatic properties and its bitterness properties, and there are various varieties available on the market which give certain characteristics to certain beers. Behind me, what we see here is a crop that is now virtually ready and fully mature, ready for harvest. So the field crew first of all come down and collect everything really that you see behind us that is green and carry it away on tractors and trailers. That is then taken away to the picking shed. Each of the vines that you see behind me is actually hung onto a little hook that is then transported up into the top of the building, and the picking process begins. From there on, the hops then transport themselves away by conveyor straight into the adjacent kiln building, which is an 8-hour drying process, where we are literally trying to preserve the actual goodness that the brewer wants.
The hops come into various types. We have aroma hops, such as Fuggles and Goldings, and then we'll have the dual-purpose hops, such as Challenger, and bittering hops, which have high bitterness levels, which impart the bitterness which you taste in the beer. Beer has been brewed for several hundred years with hops. They are an essential part of the recipe. The brewers, who were mainly monks in those days, found that hops gave certain characteristics to the beer, and one of those important ones was it actually helped us to disinfect the beer, to prevent it going off.
Last but not least is our yeast, and different types of beer need different yeasts. We have 4 different types of yeasts here at Wells & Youngs, and probably the best known ones are our Charles Wells yeast for Bombardier and our Youngs yeast that we use for the Youngs products like Youngs Bitter. The yeast turns the sugars to alcohol and carbon dioxide in a process that takes about 7 days. Once the beer has been fermented in these large stainless steel tanks, it goes through a very brief process before it's put into casks, the things people call barrels.
What's different about cask ale is that the yeast stays in the cask, whereas with other beers it's taken out. The yeast staying in the cask for the second fermentation gives another dose of antioxidants and B vitamins. It gives a much richer taste and a much fresher aroma.
Those barrels, of course, then go to the pubs, the great British institutions, the centre of the community where everybody goes to socialise.
I feel most people who have a passion for British beer also have a passion for the British pub. And in the context of the pub, there is nothing quite like a pint of cask-conditioned real English bitter. It's fresh, it's flavoursome, right to the bottom of the glass.
It's great knowing that the best winter barley that money can buy is going into a great beer. It's fantastic, and to drink a beer produced off our own farm, off this field, is wonderful.
Cask ale is a very natural product. It has no additives, no fat, no cholesterol, uses generally locally sourced products, which means low food miles.
I just think ale is something that should be perhaps cherished a bit more, and I think as long as people are aware of the fact that there's a lot of work that goes into it, and it's a great character drink, and it's not to be quaffed at.
Cask ale is really important, and it's one of the great strengths of the British pub. It's a fantastic occasion. Everybody enjoys it, a really classic pint of foaming ale. They don't perhaps see the enormity of the work that goes into it, and we see our role as actually presenting consumers with really good beer and a different type of beer for each different occasion. And that's what we all love. That's what great pubs are about.